What up, YouTube? Welcome to another edition of the words. Sometimes they get trapped. There's so much excitement. Today, hey, we're talking more web performance. Oh, what episode are we on? 4, 7, 11 at this point? So many trainings, so little time. I'm your host today, Justin Ribeiro. Today, we're talking about DevTools. DevTools is an amazing, amazing thing. You should love DevTools. DevTools is going to be your friend. Who am I? You should know this by now if you've been joining the live stream and doing the live stream things. I'm Justin Ribeiro. I'm the EVP over here at this.dot, talking about web platform engineering things. Try to make the platform better. Try to make companies better, building on the platform. We can go fast. We can have the speed. You can follow me on Twitter, where sometimes I tweet things that seem to make sense, but sometimes don't. Fundamentally, it's super important. But you can follow me over there. You can also send me an email if you like. And if you are new to the wonderfulness of corporate training and things, do you find that keeping up with constantly evolving technologies is a struggle? I know I do, particularly because it's week 5 of Court Team, and at this point, it's all very blurry. And do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? I know you're all working out there remote, and you probably, you want to reach out for a hug. I know Tara and I were just talking about it. We all need a hug. And right now, we can hug you with training. This.Labs offers personalized training programs that suit your organization needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. And as always, hey, we're sponsoring this little foray into the wonderfulnesses of web performance. You can follow us at this.labs on Twitter. Twitter's where all the action's at right now, I'm told. I don't really know. I'm not as hip as I used to be. So my kids are continuously telling me as they watch this stream, "Hi kids, how's it going? Is Dad doing good?" You bet. Hey, this week's sponsor, coffee, because how many photographs of coffee do I have? So many of them. I want to give a shout out to Ava and Tara, who continue to try to get a coffee sponsor for us. If you're out there and you're thinking, you know what, I need more web performance in my life powered by the wonderfulnesses of caffeine and the beautifulness of fine coffee, do ping us. We're always looking for more coffee sponsors here on the show. But we're not talking about coffee. No. We're talking about web performance today. And as part of our web performance thing, it helps to look at last week, where we had some general rules to help us. Because as we start to use DevTools, we always want to keep those things in mind because we're looking for things that make your web performance life better. First things first, perf is relative. Now remember, what's fast for you is not necessarily fast for everybody else in the entire world. Using the words, "it works on my machine," is not a valid web performance thing to put on any of your particular tickets, regardless if it's in Jira, GitHub, or whatever else ticketing system you use. Don't do that. You're better than that. I believe in you. Perf is relative, so you have to make sure that we are always looking for what's the fastest experience for a wide range of your users. Number 2, perf is also a lot about perception. Just because the loading times are the same across 2 different things, I mean the perception of that load time is the same. We want to make sure that we're getting things to screen and rendering as quickly as we can. If we're not doing that, well, we're going to have a bad day. And your users are probably going to bail on your site, as studies have shown. Number 3, perf is a lot about reduction, which at this point, I hope everyone is starting to realize. It's a big thing in the web performance community. Hey, ship less things. Just ship less. Or, load less things at the very least. And figure out exactly kind of where you want to wiggle that thing into the scope of things. Less all the things. So today we're talking about DevTools. So over the course of the show, we've seen a little bit about DevTools, but I want to go through some of the basics of what DevTools is and how you can get into some of the finer points of when tracing actual performance, as opposed to using a tool like Lighthouse or some of the other tools that we've sort of shown off in the last episodes, which are down in the description below if you want to see more episodes from our current web performance training series. So DevTools, really, when you start to talk about web performance, it's your home. It's the place you want to be. There's not a day that particularly goes by where I am not in DevTools tracing something. you want to not be scared to say, you know what, I need to look a little bit deeper into the piece of code I just wrote to see what its performance characteristics are. And there's a lot of different ways to surface these things, but at the end of the day, DevTools is a very quick means to really look at the web performance about just about anything. You could look at the web performance of this very page on YouTube right now. Go ahead. I'll pause for a minute. No, we can't wait that long. Just do it. Do it in your spare time. So you want to live in DevTools if you can. And realistically, this is the harsh reality. It's not really an optional thing. So a lot of folks think, hey, I just write code. I write some code in an editor. I make a commit. I'm done. I don't really have to worry about stuff. The reality is that your workflow needs to include some sort of DevTools in your life. This is the reality of things. We can't necessarily ignore the fact that our code has cost. And once you stop trying to push that down the line to somebody else, you write better code and you write faster code, and your users benefit overall across the board. So stop thinking of DevTools as just this optional tool that you sometimes pull out to fix a really weird bug. Live in the DevTools. And I get it. DevTools is ginormous, has so many features, and we're only going to look at stable today. We're not even going to look at canary and things that are coming down the pipe. And it can be difficult to sort of sort out exactly, how exactly does one use this thing? So we're going to take a look. We're just going to wander through DevTools for a while, and I'm going to show you some of the basics that are probably you might be a little bit aware of, but can make your life a little bit easier when you start to trace things. So let's switch gears. Switch in the screens. Switch in the screens. That is not the right screen. Boop. All right, so a website in Chrome hanging out. Now, normally I would trace this in guest mode if I was doing like really specific things where I'm not trying to deal with the fact that I might have a plugin that's mucking things up or whatnot. But realistically, we're just gonna use my profile because I have it sitting open here. And we're looking at my site, which I've been picking apart for the benefit of all to see that indeed, for all the things I say, even my little tiny site of the world is not as performant as it could be. And I want it to be. I want it to be. It's a process. It's not the destination you want to get to. You just want to journey forever. Space. The space of performance times. These are the important things. So we're going to open up DevTools. You can use Control-Shift-I. You can right-click and inspect to inspect a particular thing. And if you've opened up DevTools in the past, you will quickly realize I've seen this view. So your Elements panel, it's your default panel of things. When you start getting into things, a lot of people start in the Elements panel because it lets you sort of scope out the world of how things lay out. So layout's always important, and you can do some nifty things about it. Obviously, you can hover and see various pieces of that puzzle. But from a performance standpoint, it doesn't really tell us a lot about things, does it? It tells us the structure of something, but it doesn't fundamentally tell us much. We can see computeds, which can be very helpful. A lot of people don't know about computed. Computed will tell you exactly sort of the scope of where that thing is laid out and what is actually being applied to it and how the browser actually sees and renders it. So if you're having trouble with CSS and style things, look at computed. Maybe you can find the chain of things. You can also check show all to see all the things that are being applied to it across the board that you may or may not want to play with, depending on what you're doing. Similarly speaking, one of the big things that I always look at is event listeners. Event listeners, people have trouble with event listeners and what a page sort of handles. You can look through here and see exactly what actually invokes it. So you can see a little display handler here. You see that it's got this little scoped method that we could go check out. It tells you exactly where that thing is within your code. And again, this is not something that necessarily everyone uses. But if you're dealing with a lot of event listeners and trying to figure out exactly what something is doing or what's being invoked, the event listener tab can be your friend as well. Similarly, DOM breakpoints can be set across the board, and you can go into things like props and accessibility as well, which is a very super important panel if you're working on anything of particular interest. And we should all be using the accessibility panel a lot more, as far as I'm concerned. And here you can see, we don't have some labels and titles and things. Bad, Justin. Terrible. Pull request immediately. So This will give us some guide to like working with the things that we define within a page, but it doesn't really tell us the performance story, does it? So normally when we're looking at performance, we're going to look at two tabs, at least at the start point, when we're not running Lighthouse on the audits tab. We're going to look at network and we're going to look at performance. We're going to start with network. We've started with network in the past on the show and sort of in our trainings of past. Network's really important, right? We want to make sure that we can sort of get a gauge as to what our page is actually doing, what our page is actually loading. So if we fire this up, immediately we sort of start to generate that waterfall out. And it'll tell us a baseline story of things, right? We get a scope of exactly what's being loaded, what chunks are there, sort of the order of things. We can see the initiator, which is very important if you want to see exactly why a particular resource is being fired up there. Similarly, we can actually see the entire initiator request chain as to what actually called that thing and fired it up. So if we find one a little bit deeper, you can see the initiator for a particular CSS block where it actually came out of. So you can see that I've actually loaded this very thing for this CSS out of a load fonts method that gets performed in this series of asynchronous calls. You can see that, again, the request chain here, very small, because I'm not, deeply nested requesting, because as we learned in previous episodes, that would be bad. We want that critical request chain very small. So, and again, initiator is one of those favorite things I like to use a lot when I'm trying to figure out exactly why a page is trying to find or use a resource that may or may not be in the critical path. In this case, we know fonts loads rather load within this stack of things, as we can sort of see it within the crestfall of our waterfall. You can also see that we get some pings here down at the bottom, which are coming from our performance service because we're using Firebase performance tracking on the site. And again, we can see that we got push other, which shows the initiator as basically the server pushing us resources down. Similarly speaking, we can see other, which is basically saying I'm going to preload this out as our base for our progressive web app. And again, we see a whole bunch stacked here. So network is going to tell you the base story. So I always like to start with network because you can get an immediate sort of look as to where you sort of exist in the world. And when you run this with performance, you'll suddenly get a network tree on this page as well. So if we pull down, we close our console and we come down here to network, we can sort of start to look at exactly what gets loaded up. So we can see the base page, we can see the data get pushed straight away. We can see some of our blog resources also being pushed. Oh, glitchy. See our lazy resources loaded out across the board. So again, these things show up as well as the performance tab. So you can, again, start to correlate your data to see exactly not only just what you're loading, but what sort of impact it has on the thing that's loading on. And a waterfall is a good way to do this. So always start on network, see exactly what you're loading, see exactly how much your resources are loading, see where your resources are actually coming from. You also quickly realize that some of the stuff does not come off the network wire. You'll start to see, oh, wait, this is actually coming from a service worker. And again, service worker is going to give us some means to make our pages faster overall. And we're not going to get into service worker today because that's not the discussion point of this. But the one thing you also want to make sure is that you have disabled cache. I have disabled cache on by default. You can set that within your settings in DevTools itself. So you can use settings within DevTools to set up all your DevTools settings needs. So you can enable source mapping, do all this sort of things that you want. You can have code folding, the whole 9 yards. Everyone has their preference for this. Your preference may be different than my preference. Similarly speaking, you can set throttling profiles as well, which we're going to get into. Because when you're on network, you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't want the cache, but maybe I also want to tweak the way network performs. You can add custom profiles that are outside of the initial set. So if you look on your network tab, you can see that there isn't a base initial set, which oddly enough, I don't think that actually appears on the stream. So if you click the little online thing here at the top, normally you get the list of existing performance profiles. This list is also available and is set as part of online tiering, which is in the top upmost corner of the device menu view. So you can use these things to quickly sort of set and gauge, what kind of network performance you have. Because again, normally if we're testing these things across the board, we don't necessarily want to be using our full beautiful Wi-Fi and/or Ethernet connection, depending on where you're at. Usually, we want a more representative experience of our mobile lives, which even now are not particularly great. Latency's fun. So, network, pretty straightforward, straight across the board. Really, once you get into things, though, you get into the nitty-gritty of performance. And one thing that I like to do before I actually run performance is I like to set the world. So number one thing that I usually do is I will usually pop the console down here, and I will clear the body, so that I get a clean, straight start and see exactly what's being rendered out. You can do this a different way too. You could go to elements and just straight up kill things by hitting the delete key before you run your performance target. Everyone has a different method. I prefer the console one, just so I don't have to skip around on tabs. Once you have that, again, you're going to set your world. So you've got network and CPU throttling over here. I socket to me. I 6x slow down it, and I go slow 3G. Most of your profiles and your lighthouses and whatnot are going to run in the fast 3G or what they call the 4G low mode at this point. This is also to some extent why I have a 4G WPT profile from web page test, which is very similar to that. There is some nuance here that we're not going to get into about the underlying notion of the way network isolation sort of works when it comes to sort of throttling that speed gate. If you can do this local to your machine, you are generally better off. You'll get a better experience. But this works pretty good. So if we're doing things and we're not on a device and we don't have a particular gateway, or if we're not using a lab setup, this works absolutely fine. Stick it on slow G and let's rock and roll. Screenshots and memory I usually turn on. If you're finding you're having trouble with this, you can always flip screenshots off. If you have a really, really deep profile trace, sometimes screenshots will get a little jumbly. And lately, or at least for my machine, this sometimes causes DevTools to die. Yay, the joys of debugging. So we set screenshots in memory. We go over here, make sure it disables cache is set. And then we come over here and start profiling and reload the page. So we reload said page, it does some stuff, profile will stop because it thinks the page is done loading, and we can get an actual trace as to the way things are. So I'm a little squeezed for space here, but you'll quickly realize, wow, there's a lot of things to look at down here in this section of performance sort of trace metrics sort of stuff. But ignore all that for a moment. Just don't worry about that. Let's talk about the top graph bar. Really what we're looking for is, what kind of work am I doing? And, what's preventing me from either doing other work or completing what I should be doing. So in this case, we can see that there's some upfront work that happens within the scope of things. We can drag and select that particular portion. We can see this big drop gap right here where it doesn't look like anything is happening. If we scrub our screenshots, we can see that it looks like it's loading something. You can see a little skeleton right there. If we keep scrubbing our screenshots, we can see that it eventually pops on 3G or right around here, 3-ish seconds or so. And in this case, we can see some activity right here as well in our main thread, this little orange, and we get some paint and render, we get some paint and composite right here. So again, we can start to get a gauge of, okay, well, I'm doing some work, I'm waiting for something, and I'm doing some additional work. And if we come down here to our flame chart of things, we can actually see that, okay, well, some stuff is actually going on. We've got a whole big gap right here correlating with this gap up here. We can see that we're running pretty fast. Like there's no frames we're dropping. We're not seeing anything with any particular red line. We don't see anything with particularly long tasks. But we can dive a little bit further into this and sort of scope out what's cooking. So if we look at the base start of this and what is happening of things, oops. We can see that it seems that we're getting some data right here. Oh, mouse, don't fail me now, mouse. Where'd you go? I lost you. So if we're looking right here, we can scope out the notion of what is actually happening in our data structure. And we're going to zoom out real fast because I can't quite see this. Where's my technical difficulty music? Do, 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 do. So we got some weird numbers. We're getting some data. It's coming out of the service worker. We're actually going to go, well, you know, what if I don't want to use my service worker, Justin? Like, I want to get a better gauge of like what's going on in this case. We can go over to application and actually go to the service workers tab and say, you know what, let's bypass for network. And we can also update and reload. So if we're trying to debug something and we want to force update something that is particularly sitting there, we can turn on update by reload, and this will make our life slightly easier. We can also unregister the service worker and get a clean run. Similarly speaking, if you've got a lot of particular storage needs, session storage, maybe you're using IndexedDB, maybe you're being real tricky and using Cache API. So you can see down here, ooh, Cache API, which the service worker uses, and some other, you know, random things I stick in there. You can go through here and use Clear Storage. So Clear Storage is a nifty little tool. And you can see here I'm using a whole bunch of things because I've been jumping around loading images lately. You can use this to clear things out really quick if you're trying to get to a baseline really fast. So in this case, I've unchecked local and session store because there was a token I was using earlier today. We're going to check that too. We're going to clear everything straight. We can come back over here, validate that this is all off. We got no service worker. Sweet. Okay, cool. Let's go like this. Clear our performance. So you can clear the performance with this little button up here. We have over that, which apparently is also kind of coming on the video. Yay, video, you're catching up. We can go back over here, torch body real fast, and come back over here to our performance tab, and we can hit reload and start profiling again. Again, slow 3G, 6x slowdown. At this point, we're not using anything in the cache. Right there, you can already start to see, okay, well, doesn't look like the fonts have popped yet. Interesting. And there comes the swap. So the profile finished before the font swap happened because the font swap wasn't very important. Yeah, that's what we want. So got a whole bunch of dead space area in here. We can again scrub the bar. We can sort of see that things are coming down the pipe. If we scroll down through our network trace of things, he's really angry at me today, apparently. I know why you're angry too. We can see some of our resources across the board. We can also select those resources to see exactly what's going on. In this case, the durations are vastly wrong, but we're going to skip that part for right now. Once we have network, we can actually go through and start to say, well, if I'm pulling this network, you know, do I need to do other stuff? Like, what else is actually happening here? You know, and we can also start to see, okay, well, there are some actually longish frames in here. You know, a 34 millisecond frame is roughly 30 frames a second. It's a little long. Like, we don't particularly want that. Like, we've got a really long frame right here too. Like, what's going on? Like, we got a long task right here. And again, like, as you start to go down the chain, if you work your way down the stack of things in DevTools, main is where all your actions at. Because it'll let you select up your up on the top in terms of your scrub, find exactly what's going on in that particular instance of things, select them, and find not just the summary of what happened within this total time and self time of that particular function, but we can dig dive farther. So once you've selected something out of your main flame chart, you can actually go through and say, oh, well, I want to see what's actually in the bottom up. Bottom up is super important. Generally speaking, self time is the way to go to find out, hey, you know, what's cooking. We can, again, see that we're evaluating a module in this case. We can dive a little deeper into the call tree to see exactly what microtasks are actually happening in that particular instance. So in this case, you can see template instancing is actually parsing some HTML as part of our little lit element right there. You can see some painting occurring. And if we hover over the paint, you can see exactly what it did paint as well in the timeline. And again, this is a good way to figure out exactly what is your site fundamentally doing. if there's particular work that needs to happen on the upfront, you can go through and find that work very, very quickly. Whether that's an idle callback trigger. So in an idle callback trigger, we have some function call that is occurring. We can see that blog PWA actually calls it. We can dive into blog PWA and find it, which in this case is within the build. We can simply go back down through and see our base sort of stuff. So again, we can see the workbox is in play here. We can see the source maps getting called within it. So we can see use a little router.js. It's got a little lit element right here for all your lit element needs. Yeah, web components. And again, as you'll quickly realize, these panels all sort of intersect. So network will tell you into our story of where those things are. The service worker will push that request down. If you're actually firing that service worker, the initiator will tell you straight away exactly what actually fired to go get you that piece of code. And performance will tell you how long exactly it took. And this is a big key takeaway from things when you start to use DevTools, is that your main flame chart timing is where you generally will end up, but you don't necessarily want to guess. You don't have to guess. You start with the network and then work your way backwards or work your way towards the thing that's actually giving you the headache that you're having. And again, you may already kind of know because you may have worked on a particular function that you've pressed into action to sort of deal with this. But realistically, the general genesis of it is that you're trying to get to that point to actually figure out, hey, I want to have this amount of timing within it. And I need to make sure that, hey, I'm pushing enough frames in this subset to make my life easier. And again, this side in particular doesn't do a lot of work, at least on the load. As you can see, there's not a lot of script time. There's not a lot of activity. Most of it is indeed network bound because it's firing things up and trying to get that initial view sub data, even as the server pushes it as a preload, which we talked about in the last episode. But there's other things you can do with performance. So a lot of times we talk about the initial performance load. But what happens if you actually have some interaction between things? Like what if I navigate between views? I mean, this little site right here is still a PWA. What happens if I load a particular blog article? What does it do? We can actually trace that too. So while start profile and reload page is very useful, you can actually record particular activity that you're doing to see what you're doing as well. And I don't see a lot of people use this very often, but it's very, very helpful. So we're going to hit Control E, or in this case, I'm going to click the button. And not right now, we're profiling. So let's go randomly do some stuff. We're going to load up an article. Again, we're on slow 3G with 6x slowdown. It does some stuff. We'll scroll. We got some images on there. Got some other stuff down here. Okay, well, then let's go over here. Let's load this blog page. I wonder what's over here. Again, we're on slow 3G, just doing some stuff. Oh, we got another listing of stuff. We can scrub this and see what it does, just in case, maybe we've got a scroll handle that's wrong. Wander over here to talks, see some stuff. Ooh, style looks terrible on that. Terrible, terrible maneuvers, Justin. And we can hit stop. And again, maybe you're not running a 40-second trace of things, but immediately you can already see that, oh, well, we've got a lot more activity now. Things are bouncing around. We're moving some things. We're painting. We're doing stuff. And again, maybe we're trying to isolate a particular interaction that's long, or maybe we're looking for particular problems of things. And in this case, you can see right here, we've got some long frames. So we can see that we've got some problems with these little red marks right here on the top. We can go down here and see that, oh, hey, this long task took a really long time, 257 milliseconds. We can select that task and see exactly what was going on down here in our bottom-up trace of things. 249, not stellar. Again, we've run some micro task of some sort. I wonder what that might be. Similarly speaking, by the way, if you want to subdivide these in different things, if you're working on multiple domains, you're looking for a particular category or something, you can change the activity category as well on both of these. So if I wanted a category of scripting versus loading, you could do that to see exactly where you are, as opposed to no grouping or by activity. Similarly speaking, again, you can fire these things off and it's going to tell you an entire story because it'll still link to the thing that is actually doing that sort of stuff. Okay, so we've got some paint and activity here. If we scrub this, again, we can see that there is a paint that happens right here. got a lot of purple, which means we are painting something. Oh, and we're recalculating. See, that's our layout right there. So in this case, we can see that it took a long time to recalculate that style. So from the base of it, we recalced and then we repainted. We had to lay this stuff out. So if we come down here, oh, stretch with me, DevTools. We can see this little arrow of things. Boop, 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 boop. And we can see that it was triggered by said request, boop, where the scheduling occurred. And my suspicion is that this is because event blog toggle got called. So at this point, we've got some data back and we want to toggle our skeleton of things. And at this point, it schedules that recalc. But we had some other microtasks happening where parsing other things were going on. We recalcs and then repaints. And again, this ends up with being a very, very long task for us. In this case, this is the Chronicle archives. So this is a very, very long list of things, if I remember correctly. And I don't believe this uses a virtual. I don't think this uses virtualizer yet. It does not. And again, we can scope out and go, I wonder why that would be so long to paint on something that's device constrained. And you can see that I'm just dumping DOM nodes into here. So this is not particularly a performant thing to do. Now, is it? We don't necessarily want to do this. We could replace this with just a virtual scroll list of things. So eventually we'll get virtual scroller on the platform. Fingers crossed, as yet another standard module coming to the platform. But in the meantime, we could probably refactor this. And we can see that it's through lit too, because we can see the comments for lit as the handlers. We come back over here, scope out some other stuff. What else we got going on? So again, we can scrub through these and find particular points of contention that might be causing us problems. We can, again, really get fine grainness the frames of things. Again, you can see the animation occurring across the board as we sort of hovered over these things. We can trap that event as well. So in this case, the sliced bar right there, showing those of maneuvers. Boop, boop. You can see our task. Again, that paint's not very long because it'll pass. It updates layer, it paints, and we're well within our budget because we want to be under 16. And again, you can start to go through here and see exactly particular performance bottlenecks that you might be running into. You have some tasks that run. You got a function call right here. Boop. Because the event click. And we can look at this function call, and it was an anonymous function called from the router, which comes through the actual router event that gets added to the event listener. So it's binding to click and then throwing and telling our router where to go. And again, we're just scrubbing through the bar, looking for things. And ideally, you don't have something with so little activity. And you probably want short spans of time to find things. So your timeline is not so stretched out over time. Similarly speaking, we can look at this to find out what else is happening. So here you can see a service call to Firebase for that particular timer fired. This is a very long request, or rather a long timer. Probably because I push it back really, really far. And again, you're going to do most of your hunting and tracing within main and scrubbing. That's where most of the actions happen. You can use frames to tell you exactly where you've got long frames across the board where things aren't animated the correct way you want to go. And again, there's a lot more within this subsection of things within DevTools. You can look and see exactly what your service worker is doing. In this case, my service worker is not doing much. You can see exactly what the compositor is doing in terms of particular tasks if you want to get really into the nitty-gritty of things. And then you're saying, well, Justin, performance and network, those are great things. I've seen tips on them, hippy skippy for me. But what else in DevTools today is very useful for people who are just looking for, particularly quick wins? And another one you can generally use is the coverage tool. So I've shown this in a previous episodes as well. Show coverage is a quite nice tool to use. I'm going to reload this page, fire it up. Go back through, and again, we're loading a non-base route. Boop, 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 boop. And again, coverage is going to tell us immediately exactly, how much of that code we're actually pushing along we actually need to do this. And particularly on 3G slow, like if you don't need particular chunks of this code, you should offload them. You should not be dealing with this on the front thread. So coverage is a really nice tool to use if you're in a bind and you need to find particular JavaScript, or if you're looking for CSS that may be in page, or if you're looking for all. So you sometimes use all to deal with JavaScript and CSS and function too, which will also be in some of your frameworks as well as some of your web component stuff. So the coverage tool, always good to do. And then if you're really stacked for things that you're like, you know what, I really need to eke some performance out of here, you can get into memory. So we're not going to go deep into this, but you can take heap snapshots and then sort of scope out exactly what's going on within the land of things. It's going to take heap, load. And you can go down through and see exactly what is going on underneath the hood. Again, for most folks, this is overkill. You're not going to use this one on a particularly heavy basis. This is really good if you're trying to find memory leaks and other things that are really particularly troublesome in large applications where you just can't figure out exactly what's going on. This is an entire week's worth of training material as it is. But memory can be useful in those particular cases where I might need to do just a little bit more work. Application, again, you can go through here and use this to clear out most of your subsegment of things. Security, sometimes it's useful when you have cert problems and other material sort of things. This was a replacement for what used to be the little security panel that used to pop up here. This gives you significantly more information, which is nice. But performance is where most of your actions can be and where you're sort of going to live when it comes to DevTools. Using these things is not intuitive until you start using them all the time. So if you're just coming in here and going, I just don't really quite understand like why the scrub bar is this way, or like why this particular thing triggers out some amount of actual script time. Because you'll note that even as I'm scrolling, there's no activity in this. There's no real scripting action. It's just rendering frames of screen because there's no JavaScript hooks on this particular page. You can see that loading is a trouble spot. There has to be some amount of tasks that are going to run as an aggregation as it starts to parse out and load data, right? Most apps have some of these sort of bumping gaps where you're going, oh, I got to go get something and render something. In this case, these transitions are really, really hard because you do have to animate them in your SPA or your app shell. But you can make them as performant as they can be. You can see that we're not dropping a huge amount of frames because we fixed that problem in the other episode. Similarly speaking, you can see the layout still is somewhat problematic on our slower devices. And you can use this to sort of track those things down. But again, you won't get familiar with it until you start living sort of this scope of stuff. You have to go and sort of go into your site and pick it apart and find those things that are not loading in the right stacked order, where you have resources that you desperately need that you don't want to have to go back out and fetch and get because that's your base route. You're looking constantly for those materials in DevTools. And you don't want to sit here wide open. I can't stress this enough. Don't sit here wide open. You'll get a very bad gauge to what your users experience in the wild. So, network, performance, elements, yay for us. Let's talk about the sources panel. So, sources is where you can do a significant amount of work without actually having to leave DevTools when you're in a pinch. One is that you can work on projects directly in DevTools if you so see fit. Two is that if you need to run an override and test a particular fix before you make a commit and you don't really have access to said thing, file overrides are particularly nice. So we're going to stretch this out just so we can see it. We got this little overrides function here. I'm going to enable overrides. You can see for some reason I've got it labeled to downloads at the moment. You can clear the configuration for this, and it'll start with a base select. So we're going to select a folder. I'm going to set a folder really fast somewhere. You'll see this little allow pop-up because it's going to access this, and we've now got access to our folder. Now, the cool thing is that you're like, well, what use is that to me? Well, if we're trying to test a performance fix and I don't want to have to go through the entire cycle of, going through this, this is your friend, because fundamentally, if we have some block, and I realize our code coverage is still on. If we have something, we can right click and say save for overrides, which I realize is not coming through. But if we right click save for overrides, this will save this file into our overrides sort of section. Boop. We can see that we've created a folder now for the particular website. We can see that index page is currently right there. We can pretty print this page. Maybe he wants to pretty print today. Maybe he doesn't. Oh, so angry. It's so angry today, internet. Normally speaking, we would edit this page in pretty print fashion and all would be well in the world and we move on with our day. But alas, that's not going to happen right now because this Wednesday is out to get me. But generally speaking, you can edit this file straight away and it'll replace the actual network request that you're going to get. Enable local overrides is a tool I use a lot, particularly when tracing somebody's site where I don't actually have access to their repository or wherever their source code is, and they're looking for a particular performance fix for some particular library or some other subset of thing they have. Local overrides is your friend. I use this tool constantly when debugging other people's stuff. Similarly speaking, file system, you can use this to actually add a workplace folder. So if you want to work directly against some code and save things like CSS or JavaScript that you're working on as you're trying to make those debug fixes from your performance and network discoveries, you can add a workspace directly. You don't have to leave DevTools to do this. It's a very useful tool, particularly when you have a full set of repository data and you're just trying to get a fix in and you don't want to have to copy paste. Use the file system tool. It's very nice. Snippets we're not going to go into right now because snippets are a magical tool that I use a lot, and I've got a lot of snippets there I can't show. And then content scripts will show you all things content related. So you can see my Feedly injector here is being injected in the top from the extension, which would not normally be in a guest session. Assembly page will show you all things pages. Again, these are where you're going to set your breakpoints and find your source maps. Yes, source maps are good. Generate source maps. It'll make your life easier when debugging things. I say this knowing that, normally speaking, boop, you can set your breakpoints. Again, this is another one of those features that a lot of folks don't necessarily use. But you should. Breakpoints are your friend. Go in, just tack your breakpoints into your source maps and immediately see what exactly is happening. So if you have something in performance, you're like, oh, it looks like this thing is there, but like, why am I even going down that road? You might have a call stack from the performance tab, or you might have got that through the initiator stack within your network. But if you want to set a breakpoint and go through and look at your call stack, you can immediately see exactly the path you took to get there. Similarly, seeing you can also see the exact scope of what that thing is. In this case, within the actual blog PWA element. And you can set all kinds of breakpoints, DOM breakpoints, global listener breakpoints, fetch breakpoints. Again, this makes life particularly easy. So you can do this against regex and other things. So if I have a particular JSON file or whatnot, you can add JSON files within your fetch breakpoints. And again, this is just a lot of stuff that fundamentally, as you're doing your performance testing, this gives you the means to just do a little bit more. Like, you don't have to just say, oh, we have a performance bug. I have a big orange bar on my performance thing, and that means bad things. No, go in and use the sources panel. Go in and set your breakpoints. Even better yet, go in and set conditional breakpoints. Conditional breakpoints will basically run against whatever check you want. So if I'm trying to check some variable, as in the example here, I can say, hey, breakpoint if my condition's met. And that thing is true. So you can use these to great benefit as you're trying to discover really particular terrible things as you go through your source code. Similarly speaking, you can lose log points. So if you're a fan of console.log, but you can't stick console.logs in your final product, hey, good news. You can log points on the fly. This was initially, I think, a VS Code feature, and then it got ported into DevTools, which is super awesome. When you're just trying to find something in a log point, or you're trying to see a scale of stuff in your console, and you don't want to necessarily use the call stack, and you don't want to set watches. So in this case, apparently I have set a watch at some point in time on this. Similarly speaking, if you got multiple threads, you can switch threads to see exactly what's going on that. So in this case, the service worker did get activated as I reload this page. Main is still paused. Keyboard commands are generally the best way to go about doing this, but again, you can use the top tooling to your heart's content. It'll go back through. I hit my fetch breakpoint, yippity skippity, and I come back through and render. Boop. So in this case, I'm again breakpointed against my fetch. So you can see that I've paused on XH or RFS or fetch. In this case, because I've checked the any HRFX checkbox. Again, very useful when you're just trying to find something that's going on within your stack and you don't necessarily know exactly how. And again, this goes both to performance and the fact that debugging can be hard. Don't be afraid of debugging. This is why you should generally try to use DevTools every day. Run a performance trace, go to the network panel, come into sources, set breakpoint, see stack, find thread, find your scope. See what data came back, log it, conditionally check it. These are things that make the DevTools world go round. So this has been an absolute crash course in using DevTools. There is a stack of things you can do in DevTools. DevTools is typically a training session that takes a week, just in case anybody's wondering, to really get into the nitty gritty of like a particular application in your sort of corporate environment. You know, a lot of times when we're just doing general performance traces, it gets a little bit, it's hard to go astray. Again, you're trying to pull threads as you're looking for that commonality, as you're looking for those performance bugs. So DevTools is very useful for that, but it does take getting used to. Boop. So generally speaking, while my DevTools session was not the crispest of things, given some of the glitchy things, because hey, live demos, always the way to roll. Fundamentally speaking, though, you should be doing this. You should be tracing, and you should find these actionable steps. And a lot of times, if you're not running Lighthouse, that starts in DevTools first, as you're starting to develop the thing that you're going to deliver to your actual users and whatnot. So the thing that if you take one thing away from this is that don't be scared of it. Yeah, you might run into the glitch. Yeah, it might crash on you every once in a while, particularly when you're running traces on things that are really heavy with a lot of DOM nodes or really heavy thread bearing sites. I run into one of those at least once a day, and sometimes, even more, because it happens. But don't be scared of it. You have to do these things. Otherwise, you do not know what you're shipping to the end user. Don't run it open throttled. Run it down. Run it on 3G slow. See how you really perform. Take the hard look at what you're doing. If you're not willing to take the hard look and you're just going to gloss it, the only thing that's going to happen is users are going to end up unhappy. And a lot of times we can gloss this, right? You say, well, it's because my tools don't do this and that. Well, DevTools is going to surface exactly the decisions you've made and the consequence of that decision. But as a developer, relish it. Take it as a whole. Say, hey, you know what? I got a bug right there. I get to go fix something and make something faster. Users will generally be appreciative of this, because it's not an exercise in futility. It's an exercise to make our lives and our users' lives a lot easier. There's lots of resources on DevTools. Some are a little bit outdated these days online. I'll put some links in the show notes below for some stellar resources that you should be looking at, little tips and things, newsletters that some folks put out, colleagues of mine who are top notch. And again, if you really want the deep look at DevTools, like if you want to get the nitty gritty and you want to spend a week like learning how to, up your development game, hey, you let us know. We'd love to teach you, your organization, your team, wherever you are in the world, all about DevTools, all about tracing, and all about the really, really crazy stuff I didn't even get into, which is the notion of the experiments and other things that are coming down the pipe that are going to make our lives as developers and web performance gurus even better. So we're now offering virtual corporate trainings. Do let us know. We'd love to talk to you. Contact us. And that is my time for this week. I hope you're staying safe out there as this shelter at home continues. And I hope you found this an interesting session that you can start to build off of. If you have questions, do ping me on Twitter, Justin Ribeiro. Right there. Ping me, let me know if you have other questions. If you want a training session, do contact us within the information down in the video below. And boop. And that's my time. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Remember, like and subscribe with the video below because this is on YouTube and YouTube is... My kids are still watching. I'm trying to do it right, kids. I'm sorry. They're also trying to be web performance gurus, which I think we can all appreciate because now is, if anything, now's a time to learn some web performance. Have a great rest of your week, everybody, and I will catch you next week when we talk more things web performance, more things faster web.